that our military take a more direct role in securing our southern border than in the recent past. Now, Trump notes that on January 20th, he had signed another executive order. An important part is how these interrelate. January 20th, he signed clarifying the military's role in protecting the territorial integrity of the United States. And using that, he was able to assign the U.S. military on a mission to repel what he said is an invasion of the United States. Now, this latest presidential action builds on the previous one. And what it does is it gives additional guidance and other things. It says that in order to accomplish the mission of his previous executive order, this one gives additional guidance for additional actions to the Secretary of Defense, the Secretary of the Interior, the Secretary of Agriculture, and the Secretary of Homeland Security. And here's what it does. It says, 1, to provide for the use and jurisdiction by the Department of Defense over such federal lands, the important part here is federal lands, not private lands, including the Roosevelt Reservation and excluding federal Indian reservations that are reasonably necessary to enable military activities directed in this memorandum, including border barrier construction and emplacement of detection and monitoring equipment, and to provide for transfer and acceptance of jurisdiction over such federal lands in accordance with applicable law to enable military activities directed in this memorandum to occur on a military installation under the jurisdiction of the Department of Defense and for the designation of such federal lands as national defense areas by the Secretary of Defense. Let me explain what that means. Now it goes on to allow the Secretary of the Interior and the Secretary of Defense to use parts of the Roosevelt Reservation, a big area there, for these operations. That's around 60 feet wide. It runs along the U.S.-Mexico border. And then it goes even further by invoking Trump's declaration of a national emergency at the southern border. And in order to allow for the Secretary of the Interior to begin taking public land to carry out these operations, which are then provided to the Department of Defense to carry out its operations. In other words, federal lands all along the border, basically the entire border other than Texas. All of that land now is under military control. They're not seizing land from American citizens. They're not seizing land from farmers or anything like that. This is federal land. Anybody who's been to that area, you can go to what they call BLM land. It's government land. You can, go there and shoot guns normally. They've now put that under military control. And from here, basically, the Secretary of Defense can determine what type of military operations are needed, it says, within reason to carry out the order. And here's a really important part in all of this. It says it allows the military to protect and maintain the security of military installations. What is the new military installation? Basically, the entire federal land along the border. And it can also use standards in line with the long-standing authority of a military installation commander to exclude persons from a military installation. So what this means effectively, all that land along the border is now designated as a military installation. If an individual trespasses on that, whether they're smuggling drugs or human trafficking or whatever else, they're then trespassing on military land, and the military can guard that like a military base. So, what does this really mean, right? Protecting, maintaining the security of a military installation. What does that have to do with broader security? Under this order, all that land is under the purview of the U.S. military. This means anybody trespassing on military land, they commit an additional crime, actually a couple crimes. And it also means that the military can guard the border with the same level of scrutiny and the same level of force that it would use to guard a U.S. military base. In particular, the order also invokes something important. That's Section 21 of the Internal Security Act of 1950. Already in place, they're merely invoking an already in place law. Now, according to that act, this makes it a misdemeanor crime if they enter the land. So if you enter that land, you can be fined up to $5,000, and anybody who enters it can then be put in prison for up to a year. And it also invokes the United States Code on protection of buildings, grounds, property, and persons. And if you read that actual code, it says the Secretary of Defense shall protect the buildings, grounds, meaning all that borderland now, and property that are under the jurisdiction, custody, and control of the Department of Defense and the persons on that property, meaning they have some additional powers here. What's key is that land along the border is now under the jurisdiction of the Department of Defense. It's their property now, it's their land. And those grounds, military-based grounds, are now under the Department of Defense. The United States Code gives very broad authority to the Department of Defense to protect this. And this includes giving them powers to enforce federal laws, to carry firearms, to make arrests without needing a warrant, and to arrest anybody on felony charges if they so much as believe that the person to be arrested has committed or is committing a felony. A felony like human trafficking, for example. A felony like drug trafficking, for example, meaning military court, meaning military law, meaning, well, you trespass on a military base, and if you bring drugs onto a military base, you're in big trouble. It also lets them serve warrants and subpoenas, and interesting here, it lets them conduct investigations on and off the property in question. If there's an offense that's been committed against the property under the jurisdiction, custody, or control of the Department of Defense or persons on such property, meaning if you commit any crime that involved trespassing over that land, they can investigate you even on the U.S. interior. And if you understand, this basically does it on all land west of Texas. It's all the California border, all the Arizona border, all the New Mexico border. And if you cross that land, you've then committed a crime. They can actually investigate you even if you come deeper into the United States. That last part is especially interesting, right? Because look, not only do they have all these additional powers on that property specifically, that happens to be a huge swath of land along the border. They can conduct investigations, not even just arrests, investigations off the property in question, and do any offense that says that may have been committed against the property under the jurisdiction, custody, or control of the Department of Defense or persons on such property. And what could those crimes include? Well, that could be illegal entry of that land. That could be drug trafficking over that land. That could be human trafficking over that land, maybe other crimes. And I would assume that would mean also military court, because again, this is being enforced by military-based law, effectively. Now, look, in my interpretation, this suggests that anybody who commits crimes that involve crossing the border will now also be in violation of those additional crimes. And since the military can investigate anybody who does that, even if they're no longer on that property, which now happens to be all along the U.S.-Mexico border, the military would also have the ability to investigate them off of that property, maybe even into the heartland of the United States. That could go a very long way, depending on how broadly they interpret this law. This gives them a lot of leeway to do operations. The big question is, well, how much of that leeway are they going to use? And what's also important, under that United States Code, which is invoked in writing in this law, it also lets the Secretary of Defense work with outside agencies. This is where it gets really interesting. It says this: the Secretary, meaning Pete Hegseth, may utilize the facilities and services of federal, state, and Indian, tribal, and local law enforcement agencies with the consent of those agencies, meaning they have to agree to it. Keep in mind, this is the agencies, not the local government. And it says it may reimburse those agencies for the use of their facilities and services. That includes the application of their powers of law enforcement. Now, this is just my interpretation again. It seems like this act could actually override some potential barriers with the sanctuary laws, right? Under those laws, various states, like California, for example, like Arizona, like New Mexico, They can forbid local law enforcement from working with border agents. But under this U.S. code, which is invoked in this, it basically establishes the border as a military facility. The military has the power to go after people who cross that land while committing crimes, and it gives the military the power to utilize local law enforcement agencies, other agencies, and their facilities, their buildings. It's not even just police, by the way. It's, federal law enforcement, it's state law enforcement, it's others. Now, look, it's not clear whether this would apply retroactively. I would assume that you can't charge somebody for entering a military base if it was not previously military land. To me, at least, it seems to just apply to people who violate the laws going forward, basically from here on out. And that is, right, the law of trespassing on military land and any additional crimes that were committed while doing that. But the other wild card here is terrorists. And this is where it gets really interesting. Because, look, it also now happens the cartels and many gangs are now designated as terrorists. Importantly, a lot of the human traffickers and basically all of the drug traffickers work for the cartels. If those are now terrorist organizations committing crimes that on military land, that might be something they would need to investigate off of those facilities. And if they're investigating cartels, again, coyotes, human traffickers, off the land because they have committed this, or there's groups organizing and committing it, meaning it's not just as individuals, that can mean they can go after them. They can go after them on the border, they can go after them within the American heartland or even elsewhere. But again, it all depends on how broadly they use the interpretations of this law. The powers this could give to them are very broad. The question is, how much of that do they actually use? Now, with that said, though, this new order includes quite a bit of land. It's not just, this small area. This is basically the entire U.S.-Mexico border west of Texas. It's significant. I'll be talking more about this after we come back from a quick break. The Trump administration has now allowed the Department of Defense to take close to 110,000 acres all along the U.S.-Mexico border and use it for border security. Now, it's not the entire U.S.-Mexico border, but it is significant. Newsweek said this: the transfer affects 109,651 acres of land in California, Arizona, and New Mexico, specifically along the border in areas overseen by the Bureau of Land Management, BLM. And the move is part of the President Donald Trump's efforts to seal the border, it says. It notes as well, earlier this month, the president issued a memo that authorized certain federal lands to be used for military use. This includes, it says, the Roosevelt Reservation, a 60-foot wide strip along the southern border spanning parts of New Mexico, California, and Arizona that was created in 1907 to prevent smuggling between the U.S. and Mexico. If you look at the actual map of this, this includes the U.S.-Mexico border effectively west of Texas. The Texas border is right here. Everything west of that, they now control an entire strip of land covering all of that effectively. And given that Texas has already been taking its own efforts on militarizing the border, remember even during the Biden administration, they were using the Texas military. The Texas National Guard is kind of like a military. Texas is a unique state when it comes to its military. The state military in Texas is effectively a normal standing military. They're already using that in Texas to secure their border. And so you take this all together, it's very big. Texas also is not a sanctuary state, unlike the other border states. What this does effectively, it acts to secure basically the entire land portion of the southern border. If you understand, everything west of Texas is now under federal. Everything under Texas is being controlled by the Texas military. And by the way, that's in addition to Trump using the U.S. Navy and Coast Guard to secure the waters. Take this all as a whole. What does that mean? It means that, when it comes to waters, they don't need permission from the states to secure the ocean or the Gulf of America or anything like that. They can do that without needing permission from California or Florida or something like that. This means basically the U.S. government has effectively secured the entire southern border, including the water, using the military. That's what this really means. But in other news, look, a big move right now is happening as well. The White House has updated the COVID-19 website with the words lab leak. Now, you might be wondering, what's happening with COVID-19? Why would the White House change the COVID-19 website? Is there a new alert? Well, the White House published this in a post on X. It stated in all caps, definitely don't visit http covid.gov. Don't go there, they said. And if you did not listen to them and went there, you would have seen the Trump administration has now significantly changed that website. Now, first, before I show you this, let me show you what that webpage used to look like. This right here, this is an archived page of that exact website from March 2022. This is under the Biden administration. As you can see, it includes guidance on how to stay safe from COVID. It includes an advisory on wearing a face mask in public, how to get tested for COVID-19. It includes an alert that, quote, being fully vaccinated and boosted is the best way to protect against severe illness and hospitalization from COVID-19. And now, what has changed? Well, if you visit that exact same website right now, you'll find that it's very different. This is what it now looks like. The Trump administration has replaced covid.gov, that whole website, with a full page with linked reports on the lab leak origin. At the very top, it says this, quote, lab leak, the true origins of COVID-19. And it states at the top as well, quote, the origins, the proximal origins of SARS-CoV-2 publication, which was used repeatedly by public health officials and the media to discredit the lab leak theory, was prompted by Dr. Fauci to push the preferred narrative that COVID-19 originated naturally. And from there, it basically debunks that entire claim. The page gives a basic overview, laying out the key points on, what really happened. It then goes more into detail on how the world was lied to about the origins of COVID. This includes a link to the House Oversight Report, which investigates the entire thing. It details the proximal origin paper. Keep in mind, folks, look, I did the original documentary before anyone was talking about it, tracing the origins of COVID. I showed basically all of this research before it was even being talked about. The proximal origins paper actually came out after my documentary. And of course, the proximal origins paper was used to effectively censor anybody who said otherwise. Anybody who talked about possible lab leak origin, they were censored mainly because of that. It also goes, though, into the gain of function research that was being done and on the alleged role of various health organizations and officials in the scandal. This could become significant because, Trump actually removed the Biden pardons of some of these officials. It's possible some of them could face criminal charges. And if you read this whole thing, the Trump administration basically lays out really serious claims against some of these people and organizations. Now, further in, it also details the actions of many public officials and policies which obstructed investigations into the virus origin. Case in point, the censorship campaign against me started when I did the documentary on this. And so I was massively censored because I, again, talked about the virus origins. And then it goes on to detail how failures of COVID response policies happened across the board, basically. It talks about how the social distancing things didn't work, the mask mandates did not work, lockdowns did not work, and a lot of other policies that were put into place basically following recommendations from the Chinese Communist Party that did not work. It's a big deal, frankly, folks. Now, the big question, though, I'd say is what comes next? Well, great, they told us all of this. What are they going to do after this? We'll have to wait and see. There is a real possibility they might start having criminal charges. The Trump administration they actually have now begun launching additional investigations. There are some criminal investigations beginning against some elected officials and others who were involved in, like, for example, policies that led to severe deaths in like retirement homes and things like that. They're actually launching some investigations into that as we speak. And as I mentioned as well, Donald Trump actually revoked a lot of Biden's pardons, alleging that because they were signed with an auto pen, they were not officially signed by the president. There's a big legal debate over whether Trump can actually do that. But you might see, and they're laying out the basic foundations for this, it seems here, you might actually see some criminal charges of individuals and groups that were involved not only in the cover-up, but even in bad policies enacted during COVID. And remember, a lot of people argued during that time that some of the policies violated constitutional rights of Americans. Some of the policies may have actually harmed more people than they helped. Again, forcing retirement homes to take people who had COVID, which led to a lot of elderly people dying from
New
COVID,
York.
for example. Again, we'll have to see what they do with it. Well, everyone, that's all for tonight. Thank you for joining us. And as always, please take care of yourselves, stay informed, and stay free.